If you're like me, one of your favorite low-carb desserts is cheesecake. It's so super simple. Just use your favorite recipe, substitute the sugar, and that's it. You've got a great cheesecake, except for the crust. And there are a lot of crust options. You can use chopped nuts and that kind of thing, but I found a recipe for a crust, or actually made up a recipe for a crust, that is just perfect as a graham cracker crust substitute. So it's great for cheesecakes. It bakes fine, and it can work with any low-carb treat application that you need kind of a traditional graham cracker crust for. I've used it with strawberry pie and things like that. And my husband has asked that I make a low-carb key lime pie. And so what I'm doing today is I'm going to actually make two things. I'm going to make a crust for a key lime pie, and then I'm going to make a chocolate-flavored one for a peanut butter chocolate pie, all low-carb. So we're just going to talk about the crust for now. What I'm going to start with is about a cup of almond flour. And so I'm going to measure out a cup. And I've got a half cup here, so I'm going to add, I've got a half cup and another cup. And one of the things that we know about almond flour is it tends to be fairly moist, fairly wet, just because of the natural oils in the almond flour. Because if you keep mixing it, you get almond butter. So I like to use just a tablespoon of oat fiber. Now, it's not oat flour, it's oat fiber. And yes, it is gluten-free. And oftentimes it can't be certified as gluten-free because it's processed in a facility that doesn't use wheat. So if you have gluten issues or celiac, then certainly you may not want to use this if you're very, very sensitive. I've never had any problems with it. I'm not going to use a full tablespoon, maybe just a half tablespoon. But oat fiber, again, not oat flour, is very absorbent. And if you don't have it, you can use a tablespoon of coconut flour. It's absorbent like coconut flour. The wonderful thing about oat fiber is it gives it that floury mouthfeel, and so it doesn't taste like, well, it tastes more like a traditional baked good. And again, it just takes a tablespoon or so to give it that flavor. So far, all I've mixed in is 1 cup of almond flour and a half a tablespoon of oat fiber. Again, you can use coconut flour or use all almond flour. That's fine too. You need sweetener. Use whatever your favorite sweetener is. Some people really like Swerve, which is an erythritol. It's not my family's favorite, and so I won't be using it. I actually have something I recently started using, and it's Sucralose Powder. Now, sucralose is what's in Splenda, and Splenda is something people like, and you can use Splenda, but Splenda has maltodextrin. Maltodextrin is a sugar. It's wheat-based, and I don't like using it simply because it is wheat-based and it has carbs. So sucralose powder doesn't have any carbs in it. It's just pure powder. I've also used a liquid sucralose before, which I really like. You can use this powder to make a liquid sucralose, or you can use xylitol, stevia, use whatever sweetener your family likes. Now, this stuff is very powerful. I'm using my Smidgen measuring spoon. It is 600 times as sweet as sugar. And so this Smidgen may actually be a little too much for some folks' taste. I'm going to mix it in there. And it is not easy to mix. It doesn't want to come off the spoon. It's very thick. It's not easy to mix. I'm probably going to have to dig it out like this. Yep. But it is very, very strong. It is one of those things that, if you ever use it, you'll learn a little goes a long way. And a lot of people buy the powdered sucralose, excuse me, a lot of people buy the powdered sucralose and mix it with water and put it in a small dropper. And just a drop or two, if you've ever used liquid sucralose, you know just a drop or two is pretty powerful stuff. So mix that in pretty well. And so we've got whatever sweetener you're going to use. And again, use xylitol, erythritol, whichever. The bulk is not so important here, so it doesn't matter as much. It's a piece of almond I'm going to pull out. So once you feel like that's all sweet or all mixed well, butter. I've got melted butter. Now, I'm going to just kind of eyeball this, but generally you want to use about 3 tablespoons. And if you are measuring out, I did enough to do both crust, I believe. Don't just put less than you think you're going to need. And of course, you can never have too much butter, but put less than you think you're going to need and mix it all really, really well. Once you get it all mixed, we're going to take the back of the spoon and press it into the crust. It's just like you would make a traditional graham cracker crust. You take the smushed up graham crackers and mix it with butter and some sweetener, and that's it. You can also add vanilla if you want to, and when you get it mixed relatively well, you do want to taste for sweetness. Once you get it done, and I'm one of those folks who has to cook with my hands, but once you get it all mixed pretty well, you can take your hands and just pat it out. That's going to help mix the butter too. And I think we have just about the right ratio of butter here. And again, that was maybe just 2 tablespoons. So you could start with that and go from there. I'm going to press it out just like I would a graham cracker crust. I am going to taste it at some point and make sure I've got it sweet enough. Let's see. It's actually quite sweet, which is that tiny bit of sucralose I used. After I make this one, and this is just a traditional, like I said, graham cracker crust, and you'll be amazed at how good it is. I'm going to make a chocolate one. To do the chocolate, we're going to do pretty much the same thing we did with the vanilla, but we're going to add cocoa powder. So that's the only difference. I've got this crust out, and this crust, believe it or not, will hold up pretty well when you're cutting your cheesecake or your pie, your key lime pie, whichever thing you're making. It's a little dry here in the corner, so I'm just going to dip my fingers in the butter. I won't mind licking those later. So, dip my hands like that, and you can see I'm going up the sides. You can also use the same crust recipe in a springform pan. So if your cheesecake gets baked in the oven in a springform pan, that's fine. This recipe still works. So basically I used a cup of almond flour. You can use a cup and a half if you have a larger dish than I have, or if you like a thicker crust. I used a tablespoon of coconut flour or oat fiber, or just use all almond flour. Use what you have. Most ingredients are not as picky as we think they are. Anyway, spread that over and up the sides, and that's all there is to it. Let's make the chocolate one. So I'm going to set this aside, and I'm using cocoa powder, good old Hershey's cocoa powder. I've used all kinds of cocoa powder in the past, but this works well. I'm going to use 3 tablespoons. It's going to have a nice, thick, chocolatey taste to it. And it's about time for me to buy more cocoa powder, which is going to be a problem because I need it for my peanut butter chocolate pie. Again, you want to use sweetener. Use whatever your favorite is. And I used the smidgen before. I'm going to use a tad because it stuck to the smidgen. And I'm not going to use a full tad, I don't think. I'm just going to use part of a tad. And I do want it a little bit sweeter, simply because I'm using chocolate, but not overly sweet. I'm going to mix it in this bowl before I put it in that pan. And again, I started with just a cup of almond flour, some oat fiber. I'm mixing the cocoa powder into it, mixing the sweetener into it. And once I pour it in the dish, I'm going to put butter, melted butter. I'm going to pat it out just like I did with the other. And it will make a fantastic crust. It's very, very similar to a graham cracker crust. Now, there are recipes for low-carb graham crackers, and you can do that. You can make those recipes and then crush that up. But honestly, it's a lot of work to do the low-carb graham crackers. Is it worth it? Probably. But if you don't have a lot of time, this certainly will work. I'm going to pour the butter over it just like I did before. Melted butter. And I'm going to stir it up. And if you can see, it's all just kind of talking to each other and getting all mixed in, getting to know each other a little bit better. And as I get that mixed up, I'll get rid of the spoon and go to using my hands, because a good cook doesn't mind getting her hands or his hands messy. That's like the best part, like making a mud pie, except you're in the house and you get to eat it. Okay, clean off that spoon. And I will eventually give it a taste to make sure we have it sweet enough. Definitely sweet enough. Very good. I really like using the powdered sucrose. It's not something everybody likes to use, but it is very much like natural sugar to me. And it does not seem to raise my blood glucose. I need to do some testing with it just to make sure. But that's one of the most important considerations, is does it raise blood glucose? And as long as it doesn't, I'm content to use it. So that's all you do. You mix your almond flour, again, 1 to 1.5 cups of almond flour. Mix in either a tablespoon or half tablespoon of oat fiber or coconut flour, whichever you prefer. 2 to 3 tablespoons of melted butter. And then you can use your sweetener. Now, if I was using Swerve, I'd probably use a 1/2 to 3/4 cup. Again, you can taste it for sweetness and add more. The same thing with stevia. And stevia, wow, it varies so much by product that I certainly would start with just a few drops of liquid stevia and then taste and add from there. Remember, you can always add more, but you can't take away very easily. So certainly go very, very light on the stevia. And I have gotten this much sweeter than I intended. That liquid sucralose is quite strong, so I certainly will not make the filling, the chocolate peanut butter filling, as sweet as I would have, because I'll keep that in mind. So that's it. That's a very simple, low-carb graham cracker crust substitute. Hope you enjoy.